They often say history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And there's definitely a lot of potential catalysts out there for a big market disrupting situation to unfold. But the biggest difference this go around, is going to sound super cliche, is that there's an alternative. It's Bitcoin, Bitcoin's hope.
There could be one hell of an economic disruption. The optimistic side of all of this is that when we do get back to a sound money standard, things will be good. The pessimistic side is that we are in a mess, and that there may be pain before we get to, we've got to take our medicine before we start to heal. And that's just a fact.
Larry, welcome back to the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on again on the
Yeah,
Culture Bit.
thanks again, Alan, and BTC Magazine. I really I love you guys and appreciate you inviting me to come back, talk about my book and
Always.
other stuff.
Yeah, no, super excited to talk about the big print today. I guess for the audience, before we jump into things, a quick background on who you are. I know there's a lot of economists that are familiar with you and your work. But quick bio: 38-year investment pro, founder of Equity Management Associates, a firm focused on shielding wealth from fiat's fall, leveraging gold, silver, and Bitcoin. From venture capital roots at Summit Partners and Geo Capital to a post 2008 pivot towards sound money. He's a New England native and now champions Bitcoin as a fix to our broken system. He just shared on the screen his latest book, The Big Print: What Happened to America and How Sound Money Will Fix It. Happy to chat about that book today with you, Lawrence.
Absolutely.
But before we do, the last time you and I chatted was pre-Bitcoin Mina. I know you
Yeah.
spoke at the event. It was a very exciting event, to say the least. A lot of buzz around the potential of a Bitcoin strategic reserve, along with interest from sovereign wealth funds looking to integrate Bitcoin. But let's start with your experience at Bitcoin Mina. I know you spoke at stage. I know you probably had a lot of interesting experience. Tell me a little bit about
Yeah,
it.
it was a great show, and it was very powerful for me. And as you know, one of the Trump sons was there, and Manafort was there, and the Bitcoin Policy Institute was there, Matthew Pines, and what I learned in the whole experience was that nation state FOMO is coming, right? I mean, I heard Oman and UAE and Saudi Arabia are all buying Bitcoin, and obviously there was a lot of whispering about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, which we now have, and it's just very powerful. I mean, this has moved far beyond just some cyberpunks and those of us who want to store our money in a sound form of a digital asset to a digital asset that is not only being adopted by institutions like BlackRock, largest money manager in the United States, but also now countries, and it's hugely exciting and has a lot of implications that I don't think the market is fully absorbed. I mean, I think the price of the coin should be multiples of where they are right now, but that's it takes time, right? So, but it was a great show, and I learned a lot, and I saw a level of institutional and country state adoption, or learned about country state adoption that I was not aware um, was as imminent as it was. Of course, now we've seen it here in the U.S., so it's all good.
Absolutely. Since the event, probably the biggest piece of actualized news, I think, was the UAE, or more specifically, Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund, announcing
Yeah.
purchases of BlackRock's IBIT, so the Bitcoin ETF, into their sovereign wealth fund. And while not actual Bitcoin, it's still Bitcoin exposure. What are your thoughts on that? And were there any other bits of news from that event, just in conversations that you had, that you're waiting to see actualized?
Well, I think I'm not sure if the Oman stuff has been made public or not, but maybe it has. I think the Saudi Arabia stuff has not been made public, but the word I was getting was that these other countries in the Middle East, countries with enormous wealth, have were beginning to embrace Bitcoin as a form of digital gold, and they were stacking, and that they were actually there to, among other things, ask Trump's son and Manafort, "Hey, we're thinking of doing more of this. We're thinking of announcing it." And I was told by the Policy Institute guys that the U.S. response back was, "Yeah, it's all great. We're very supportive, but just don't jump in front of us. Let us do our thing first, and then go ahead and announce it." So, as I say, to me, that's just huge. I mean, there's trillions of dollars in these countries, and and they've traditionally been sound money countries. I mean, the Arab culture loves gold, the precursor to Bitcoin. And so if they're now learning to make the jump from being investors in gold to investors in Bitcoin, that's a really big deal, in my opinion. So I couldn't have been more bulled up coming out of the conference. And you always hear these things, and then you wait and see, well, is it really going to happen, right? Is Trump really going to deliver? Are we going to get a strategic Bitcoin reserve? And then there were some disappointing things with the Trump coin, the Melania coin, and all the other shit coins getting put into another, bucket. But at the end of the day, he came through. And although they have not announced plans to buy a lot, they've announced that they're intending to buy if they can do it in a revenue neutral way. And they've said they're not going to sell. And, and then the Loomis bill today, as you probably saw, has picked up some additional sponsors. And so, I mean, this is how it happens, right? Slowly but surely, the consensus grows that this is the asset to own.
Yeah, the recent signing of the SBR executive order
Right.
has completely shifted the tone of how Bitcoiners are viewing Trump. It's almost funny. It's literally on a weekly basis. He's
Yeah.
Bitcoiners' best friends, and then the next week he's everybody's worst enemy.
Well,
I mean, like you
he's a little all over the map, and he had to drag the crypto guys along with him, sadly, because they gave him a lot of money. And this is politics, right? It's the art of compromise. And us maxis are kind of like, oh God, why are you doing all that? But I kind of get it. And who knows? I mean, I don't know if the crypto and Bitcoin people made the difference in the vote, but they certainly didn't hurt. And so he's got to do what he's got to do, right?
yeah, the man's a master of 3D chess for sure.
He really is. Yeah.
And at least from the Bitcoiners' perspective, it was very reassuring to see that Ethereum, Solana, some of these alternative coins are being left out of the strategic reserve. It really
Us.
signals that the Trump administration and even Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Commerce, Lutnick and Bissent really understand the value proposition of Bitcoin as a
I think
whole.
that's right. I think that's right.
Super reassuring.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is that this has been signed in as an executive order. It hasn't been passed by Congress. And in addition to that, the way they're funding, the initial coins of the reserves are through seized coins. So
Right.
what do you think about this? Is this a win for sound money, or is this just a half step? Is there more work that needs to be done
Well,
on
there's
our end?
obviously more work that needs to be done, but it's a big win. Let's face it. I mean, it could, it'd be nice to have it enacted through legislation so that if we have Team Blue winning in 4 years, they can't undo it, right?
Right.
But I think even Team Blue, has caught some heat because I mean, didn't they sell almost an equal number of coins, and they left $17 billion on the table as a result of selling those at much lower prices. So I feel like we've got knowledge now at the highest levels of the U.S. government that this is an important strategic asset to hold. Excuse me, and that's a big deal. And so now every other country in the world has to focus on, gee, if this becomes the neutral reserve currency, and anyone who studies what's going on knows that we need a neutral reserve currency as a result of Triffin's dilemma. They might start asking, well, and many of them, by the way, have bet on gold. We know China, for example, has bet hugely on gold, has a lot more gold than they say they have based on the import export data. And so, they're going to have to sit there and say to themselves, gee, are we making the right bet? Because this is digital gold and it's better than gold in many respects. And, I mean, this is Sailor's point, which is, we should sell all our gold and use it to buy Bitcoin, which I, generally speaking, kind of agree with. But I don't think we're there yet. And then again, there's some debate as to how much gold we really have. And I find it interesting. Trump said he's going to go audit Fort Knox. I hope he does. I hope he finds it's there. I'm a little worried that that might be an empty promise. I'm not sure they're going to like what they find, but that's another bridge they got to cross. But look, this is a step along the way, and my sense is there'll need to be more steps. They need to find revenue neutral ways to grow the reserve. I think the minute they start growing it, that'll be another big step. And I think they will grow it. I think they know that they need to have a higher Bitcoin price to help them, because stable coins, which are a small piece of the overall Bitcoin network today, not insignificant, but smaller, are big buyers of treasury bills. And guess what? The U.S. has a lot of treasury bills to sell. And so if the Bitcoin price goes higher and stablecoin market gets bigger, and then those stablecoins need to buy treasury bills, well, that's all good for the U.S. government. So, and Bissent knows that. They from back channels, what I've heard, they get it. And so this is really, really positive. And now, does it manifest in the price on, immediately? No, the price is down right now. I mean, it's like so many Wall Street things, it's kind of buy the rumor and sell the news. And, we bought the rumor, got to 106, and of course now the news is getting sold. And, I think it's more what's going on right now. I think it's more actually liquidity driven, just that, the world is kind of turning risk off on the overall stock market because the economy appears to be rolling over and all these tariffs and all the things Trump has made it clear he's going to disrupt things, he's going to break things, as necessary. And one could argue that he's trying to break the stock market in order to help the bond market, because they've got a lot of debt to roll over, and it's a problem. So it's an interesting time, I'll tell you that. I mean, there's going to be more going on in this monetary stuff the next 5 years than there has been in the last 20. We're really in for a lot of change, in my opinion.
A lot of change is an understatement. It's almost hard to unpack what's going on a week to week basis with
Yeah,
all the monetary changes. You mentioned treasury bills.
yeah,
That's always kind of been the underpinning at the global level for
right.
all these nation states to get exposure to, our economic powerhouse. And, you know, interest rates are stagnant right now.
Right.
I think the Fed put a pause on them earlier this quarter. They're talking about maybe potentially lowering them into Q2. But treasury bills are in question, largely due to actions driven by the previous administration and, Russia and the Ukraine war. I think BRICS has realized that it's not the safety net that it once was, and I think they've started to look to alternative assets. To your point earlier about Trump just looking to break what he can break, why is he doing that? And why maybe the rush to signing the SBR, and how does that interplay with one another?
Well, I think the SBR, they signed it because they wanted to signal that we were going to be a leader in the crypto area. I mean, one thing that's great about the way Trump was managed into this, you recall 3 years ago, Trump hated Bitcoin, didn't really understand it, and honestly, to this day, I don't think he completely understands it. But I'm sure his advisors do. But I think what's going on here is that he wanted to keep his promises to this group. I mean, I thought it was extremely positive, obviously, to let Ross go as he had promised. And he's a competitive guy, and I think the people who sold it to him, in my view, very smartly said, "Look, this is a race with China, and we don't want to let them get ahead." And he doesn't like to lose, and so that's my guess as to why he did it. I'm not sure he fully understands all the implications. I mean, I'm not sure anyone really fully understands the implications. I mean, if they do what Saylor is talking about doing, which is sell the gold used to buy Bitcoin, I mean, this is really, really a massive devaluation of the dollar. And there've been mixed signals coming out of this administration. I mean, Basant has said, we want the dollar to remain the world's reserve currency, but then he's also said we need a weaker dollar, in order to balance trade. And so those two things are slightly in contrast, don't go together. But I think, the world has been unbalanced massively because of the strong dollar policy and because of the financialization of the United States. And Percent said something else I thought was very, very indicative of where they're going. And that is, Wall Street's done extremely well for the past 20 years, and Main Street hasn't done so well. And, it's Wall Street that drives the stock market. And, the people who voted Trump in, a lot of them don't own stocks. They're the working class, and they don't necessarily have enough capital to own stocks. So if the stock market goes down, that's not going to hurt them that much per se, except insofar as it then turns into a recession and they start losing their jobs. So, the problem is it's all interconnected, and the whole economy has been built upon, cheap money and puffing up asset values. And I think, they want to try and reverse that process, but I think the word I used earlier, is it's going to be disruptive. It's going to be hard. And they've even come out and said that. And I think Besant also said that, it's very clear that to the degree they're going to be disruptive, they should do it right up front, because in 2 years the voters get another say, and in 4 years they get another big say on what team is going to be running the country. And so if you're going to have trouble, if you break things right now, one can argue, or he can make an argument that, hey, Biden left us with a pile of shit, and we're doing the best we can given what we were left. And hopefully then things will be looking better as the 4 years rolls around, so that JD will have a chance to win. So there's a lot of interesting cross currents going on, but they know that we have to weaken the dollar to balance trade and really to kind of reshore manufacturing here. I mean, another, related part of all this is, it became very clear in this war that, we couldn't even build the shells we needed to supply the Ukraine for the war. And, manufacturing in the US has been hollowed out, and that's got to change. And the way for that to change is a weaker dollar, so that, we basically, bring manufacturing back here and it's competitive. Now, the thing that I think most people aren't talking about, including Trump, is that tariffs and a weaker dollar also will result in domestic inflation, more domestic inflation. But hopefully, if it's domestic inflation, but everyone's fully employed, then the two will balance out, and there'll be wage growth for those who are the workers, and the people who will not do as well are the people who hold bonds, or the Wall Street people who've made all their money off financialization. So I think that's kind of the big picture of what they're trying to do. My partner describes, I have a partner at Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, David Foley, said this is brain surgery. I mean, it's going to be really hard. And we don't really know exactly how it's going to unfold. But I think one conclusion I draw is that almost no matter how it unfolds, it's good for Bitcoin, because it's likely to lead to some more monetary chaos. And this was the point of my book, which was that really all forms of monetary chaos, ultimately force the Federal Reserve into using the only tool they have, the only hammer they really know, which is print. So, they're gonna when things get rough, the market falls enough, the bond market, has an upheaval, enough people are laid off, people are crying for stimmy checks, whatever it might be. The solution will somehow be to print the money to solve it, versus letting a complete depression unfold and the complete collapse of the system. And therefore, that printing will be inflationary, and therefore, in an inflationary environment, you want to hold assets the government can't print. And the two premier assets in that category, in that bucket, are Bitcoin and gold, in that order, with Bitcoin being better than gold, but they're both unprintable. You can't print gold. So, well, although they have paper gold, but in general, you can't print real gold. So,
Very true. No. Um, a lot to unpack there. Yeah.
yeah.
So the comparison of the Trump administration performing brain surgery on the economy here to try and taper the everyday American's expectation on what they promised, right? Preventing inflation from rising, but subsequently also understanding from an economic standpoint that they have to let inflation run to let the economy grow is
Right.
a very hard dynamic to navigate. And I don't know how you position the messaging out there. And in parallel to that, right? So we just had the executive order signed, right? That's on the governmental level. We
Mhm.
have at the corporate level guys like Michael Saylor who are building their own parallel Wall Street with this corporate Bitcoin treasury strategy.
Yeah.
I know you and your peers at the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund are also seeking, companies who are adopting a similar strategy, but more specifically, companies that are, looking to bring over high performance compute, AI agents, energy markets, and
Yep.
that sort of thing. How does your average everyday person make any sense of this? Like, what are the key points and takeaways that they should be paying attention to?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, to boil it down to its simplest form, Alan, I think that what we've entered, and then I think a lot of people have missed this. I think the average person, the average investor, I still encounter this a great deal, feels like stocks are the place to be. They know we live in an inflationary world, and the way you hedge that is stocks. And stocks have slightly outperformed gold over long periods of time. And stocks do represent claims on businesses that throw off, earnings and dividends. And so stocks aren't bad per se when they're appropriately priced relative to what you're buying. Problem is that the stock market right now is at historic highs on any metric you want to use, the Buffett indicator, whatever. It looks like 2000 or 1929, and so you're not getting a lot of everyone's in that stock bet already. They've already made that bet, and so there's not, it's fully priced in my opinion. There's not a lot of upside in it. And I think what happened in 2020 and changed is that we went from a 40-year period of deflation where interest rates were coming down, driven by a lot of things, driven by all Jeff Booth stuff about technology and so on and so forth, and the China price. And but we went from that period and it got ridiculous. I mean, we had $18 trillion of negative yielding bonds. I mean, that's about as deflationary as you can get when you have to pay somebody to hold, to hold your money. I mean, come on. So that it was just extreme, right? I mean, the 10-year was at 50 basis points in, March of 2020. And so bottom line is that reversed, in my opinion, violently. When we had the COVID event and the 40% growth in the money supply. And so and history shows that you really can't put inflation back in the bottle very easily. That once it gets started, it kind of tends to continue because everybody wants their piece of it. I mean, a good example of this is, we're supposed to be aiming for a 2% target, right? Well, the dock workers, the longshoremen went out on strike last fall in October. They got a 6-year contract with a 60% increase in their wages. That's 10% a year for 6 years. All right. 10% a year for 6 years. So, I mean, that basically what that shows you is that when labor and how were they able to get that? They were able to get that one because they had a union, a lot of power. They fought all the automation of the ports, etc. But more importantly, they had just been screwed. I mean, they'd had a 40% increase in the money supply. And so suddenly whatever they were making bought 40% less goods and services. And so they were pissed and they had the power and they went and they demanded this higher rate. Well, okay, that higher rate, fine, they get it. And I get it. I get why they got it. But the point is, that's going to flow through to every single piece of goods and services that comes through those ports. And it's locked in for 6 years. So, and 10% is a long way from 2%, the 10% annual increase they got. So the point is, we live in an inflationary environment now, in my opinion. And because of the math, and I've laid this out in detail in my book, and you know it, and Lynn Alden has done a great job laying it out as well, with her "nothing stops this train" meme on how the government spending is out of control. And we can get to Doge in a minute, but um, because of the math, they really have to keep the system inflated and inflating, or else it collapses. I mean, it's like inflate or die is kind of the mantra. Richard Russell used to say that. So as a result of that, I mean, for the average person listening to all this, you don't have to get all the detail and all the color that I'm giving you. What you just need to understand is that we do live in an inflationary environment now. It's likely to persist for at least 10 years or until we address the problem seriously. And therefore, what people need to do to protect themselves is to invest in or buy or be exposed to things that the government can't inflate. And the best one is Bitcoin. The second best one is gold. So, that's really kind of the easy, summary bottom line. There's a lot more behind that. And by the way, how we get from here to there, it's going to be messy. I mean, Bitcoin could go to 140, it could come back to 70. I mean, these are volatile assets. And, history shows in changing monetary systems like what we're going through right now, you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to have conviction because there will be volatility.
Absolutely. Well, one could argue it is messy right now. I mean, just
Yeah.
look at housing prices.
Right.
I'm myself at the back end of the millennial generation. I have a young family. I'd love to own a home. Would love to live in my own house, but I look at things through a Bitcoiner's lens, and there's a bunch of memes that illustrate this point that holding on to your coins versus putting that same dollar amount into real estate makes absolutely no sense in this current market.
It makes,
Um,
holding on to your coins makes sense. Putting it into the real estate makes no sense, right? Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, no, I mean, my kids are in their 20s, they can't buy housing, and they're doing fine, they're making good money, but, yeah, the system is but that'll get re-equilibrated. I mean, as this change that I'm describing takes place, the monetary premium in housing will go away, and those who decided to hold Bitcoin versus housing will be able to buy plenty of house, in a few years. You're already starting to see that. I mean, housing prices are soft all over the place. So, and I suspect they're going to get much, much softer. So you're going to be able to buy your house, but it's obviously in the shorter term, I would advise anyone who's young right now to rent, not buy. Because I think
Absolutely.
on a relative basis, I mean, I'm sure you've seen, in fact, I had it in the book. I'm sure you've seen that meme that shows how many Bitcoin it took to buy a house, right? Where the average housing price has gone up substantially, but the number of Bitcoin necessary to buy a house has gone down substantially, for the past 15 years. So
Yeah, I think it was over the course of the last two cycles. It starts at like 330,000 Bitcoin, and now it's just like 6 Bitcoin.
next, right. And wait through a few more cycles and you'll be able to buy the median house for two, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I bring it up, because you've already pretty much perfectly outlined this, but I've heard you call fiat a moral disaster
Yeah,
time and time again. The main reason being because the government can just print it in mass. On the flip side, we have Bitcoin. How do you see in your purview, like, what's the biggest way Bitcoin flips our values? As the
yeah.
executive order signed, we're seeing Bitcoin go mainstream. I think this is a relative an important idea to consider, especially with younger investors, and even some of the baby boomer generation that's looking to offload some of their own assets to the next generation.
Well, look, Bitcoin is honest money driven by math, and it's the most honest form of money mankind's ever had because there's no dilution in it. Even gold gets diluted at 1.7% a year, and the book has a whole chapter. I mean, where the title of the chapter is "Sound Money is a Moral Issue," and it really is true. I mean, there's a lot of history to support that. I mean, people in the Bible, this is thousands of years ago, they were writing about honest weights and measures because the history of people messing with the monetary system to try and get advantage. This has been around for a long, long, long time. Fiat currency has abused a lot of people over many, many years. This isn't some new problem. It's kind of new and acute right now, getting more acute, post 1971, and as we go into this whole cycle. But I think what'll happen is, the broken money like we have, fiat money like we have, leads to fiat sort of behavior, gambling and bad morals and not thinking about the long term and just kind of spending your seed corn and cheating to get as much as you can as quick as you can because you really don't care about tomorrow. Whereas sound money people very much believe in investing and being patient and you plant a seed and for a tree and you watch it grow and you don't chop the tree down just to get the wood when it's a couple years old. I mean, and so to me, money is all about kind of reaping and sowing. I mean, you've got to reap savings and then ultimately you'll sow the benefit of those savings. Of course, you won't if you're saving in fiat terms because the government's going to rob you. So, but if you're saving in a sound money thing, I mean, and I think it's one of the things the human mind doesn't necessarily always understand is the benefit, is exponential functions and the benefit of compounding. I mean, I would say to anybody who's young, and I've done this with many people who are becoming investors, I take them to a financial calculator and I explain to them, that if they start off with, just saving $10 a week, and investing it in something that can return 10% a year, and they start this in their 20s, it's virtually impossible that they don't end up in their 50s or 60s worth millions and millions of dollars because of the value of compound interest. And so, but that takes a long-term perspective, and a lot of people tend to not have that. They tend to just want instant gratification. They want the new car, they want the new house. They don't want to save. But they pay for that in the longer run because they've given up opportunities. And to be frank, I mean, in a broken system where it's very hard to save and where you're being robbed if you save, like you are with fiat, I get it. I mean, there's a reason, the lottery, take the lottery as an example. The lottery makes absolutely no sense. I mean, first of all, the government's raking off like 40% of it, right, for their own income. Second of all, the odds of winning it are just like so astronomical, why bother playing almost? But, to somebody who has no other hope, who just sees they're in a system and they're screwed, it's like a little sliver of hope. And they're like, well, I realize I'm probably throwing this $2 away or this $10 away, but who knows? Maybe I'll hit it and my dream will come true. That's and that's a sad way to be because that $10 invested and saved could become $100. It could become $1,000, over years. So, but it's unfortunate, and it's the nature of the system that we have right now. People's incentives are wrong and they've been turned upside down, and the old virtues have been lost. And I know a lot of young people think, well, the old virtues are just for fuddy-duddies, but the old virtues, there's a reason they were there, I mean, over hundreds and thousands of years. I mean, not eating your seed corn, was a time-worn phrase. And, you eat all your seed corn, guess what? You're not going to be able to plant next season. You're not going to have any corn. So, savings is the basis of creating capital, and then deploying capital correctly is the basis of improving productivity, efficiency, and society. And the book talks about this, where the price of capital, which is what the interest rates are, absolutely positively has to be set by the free market in a fair manner, or else you get stupid malinvestments. You get, money thrown at wars, $8 trillion in the Middle East, etc. And so having sound money leads to quote unquote a sound society. Society does not do stupid shit when when the money is sound, or is less. I shouldn't say it doesn't do stupid shit, because human beings will always do stupid shit. but, but there'll be less stupid shit if the money is sound, at least in my opinion. So I was kind of long-winded, but I hope I got at what you're looking for.
No, no, absolutely. Speaking of not stupid shit,
Right?
um, your book, The Big Print. I know we've kind of touched on it a couple of
Yeah.
times, but for the audience, maybe let's start with. I want to talk about it
Thank you.
because
Yeah.
you're obviously very you have all the expertise in the background of not just having your underlying values pinned by the value of gold, but I know I've heard you multiple times talk about how you wish you would have bought Bitcoin when it was going
Yeah.
up from $100 to a thousand
I did. I
dollars.
missed all that. Yeah. Well, I
um
bought some at 400, but I didn't buy enough.
that's what every Bitcoiner says though, right?
Well, right. I mean, none of us, we never feel like you have enough, and it's obvious looking backwards. Yeah, let me talk about the book, just for, I mean, most people probably have heard this or aware of it, but so the book is pretty simple. Part one is the problem, part two is the solution. And I tried to write. There are a lot of great Bitcoin books, and this book is not necessarily better or as good as some of the great Bitcoin books that have been written, like Safe's book and Jeff's book and Lynn's book. I mean, they're fabulous books. But I identified what I think is a slightly different segment of the market, which is to say I wanted to write a book that the average citizen could read, somebody who didn't know anything about monetary economics, or people who don't really follow this stuff. Just somebody who's kind of getting screwed. They know they're getting screwed. They go to the supermarket, they see the price of everything. They know their wages aren't going up as fast. They're like, "What the hell's going on? I'm getting screwed." Okay, so I wanted to lay it out in very clear terms for that person. Here is how and why you're getting screwed, and here's how it developed over a long period of time. So going back even to the beginning of the country briefly, but I wanted to make it Reader's Digest. I mean, it's not, you don't have to get buried in that stuff. And but some people found a couple of chapters a little long, and okay, skip them, but you'll still get the message. But I want to try and show people, quote unquote, why they're getting screwed and how they're getting screwed, and just how broken and corrupt the system is. I mean, and I have the advantage of being older than all you guys. I remember and saw all this stuff firsthand. And when it went down, I was like, whoa, what's that all about? Phil Graham's wife was on the board of Enron, and Phil Graham is changing the rules, on derivatives. I mean, what the fuck, right? Or, Morgan Stanley's wife, the chairman of Morgan Stanley's wife was able to get a $220 million non-recourse loan from the Federal Reserve to buy assets, in the GFC. I mean, WTF, right? I mean, the corruption was it's just so outrageous. And I want people to be aware of how outrageous it's been so that they get pissed off, so that we can start to get a big movement, not just a little movement, a big movement that says, we got to end this thing. We got to kill this fiat monster. We got to kill the Fed. We got to kill Keynesianism. We got to kill all this stuff because it's wrong. So I started off with that and just trying to explain all that to people. And then, that's the bad news. It's kind of depressing, right? It's pretty broken. And I don't want to be a doomster, because I'm very optimistic about what's going to happen and where the world is going. But the second half of the book was, okay, yeah, okay, you don't like it. I don't like it. It's not right. But here's what we can do about it. Here's the solution. You can vote with your feet. You can vote with your savings. You can support Bitcoin. You can spread the word. You can pass this book around to your friends. I mean, if we all get to the point where we're like, God damn it, this isn't right. We want sound money. We want the Federal Reserve to get shut down. Then, maybe there's some possibility we'll get enough politicians and a groundswell of movement to actually shut it down and to fix it. And that's how every great change has occurred in society. I mean, the American Revolution, they started off, and a third of the people were patriots, a third were loyalists, a third didn't give a shit. They were just farmers, probably somewhere not paying attention. But Thomas Paine wrote something called Common Sense, and it galvanized a bunch of people. Like, hey, this British shit, this just isn't working for us. We got we got we got to go out and shoot these guys. We got to have a revolution and form our own form of government. And so, I mean, immodestly, I would love if this book would be something like that, where I get enough Americans to read it that they're going, gosh, he's right. This thing really is broken, and we got to fix it. You know what I mean? I mean, that's kind of the dream. Now, is it an impossible dream? I mean, look, there are days, Alan, where, and I know my wife said this about me, it's like I'm Don Quixote tilting at windmills. You know what I mean? I mean, whether whether this is going to work or not, I mean, it is certainly open for debate. And there are a lot of people, in my circles who think I'm crazy, but I don't think I'm crazy, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. And so what I'm trying to do is convince, it's like that meme where you have the one Bitcoiner standing against all the, no, you're all wrong, right? So I'm that guy, right? I mean, to the fiat people anyway. So that, that, that
So,
that's kind of the book in a nutshell.
no, I thank you for walking me through that.
Yeah,
I want to pick your brain a little bit on
sure.
how you formulated some of the arguments against the skepticism from Bitcoin. Obviously, you set up the book by showcasing how the system's broken, and then you lay into the benefits of Bitcoin. But all of that stems from your background in gold. I mean, gold bugs were the original people sounding the bell, saying, "Hey, decoupling the dollar from from gold in 1971 probably wasn't the best idea."
Yeah.
There's going to be some long-term implications there. And now, Bitcoin's an evolution of the sound money principles that gold had as a whole. Um, but in your experience, right, whether at Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, writing this book, going to MENA, and meeting with world leaders, how have
I
you
think,
seen the conversation shift when you bring up Bitcoin as the superior alternative solution to this inflationary Keynesian system
well,
that we're
it's
in?
look, it's shifted enormously, Alan, as you know. I mean, you've been in this space as long as I have. I mean, you have guys like, well, look at Donald Trump. There was a time when he was down on Bitcoin. I mean, hey, Eric Saylor in 2013, thought Bitcoin was a fraud, and he changed his view on it, and I mean, well, I'm not Eric Saylor, Michael Saylor. I mean, there's nobody with a stronger, viewpoint on it today than he. Take a look at take a look at Larry Fink. I mean, a true fiat lord. I mean, the CEO of BlackRock, and but not a stupid man, right? I mean, a man who evolved to the point where he looked at it, he studied it, he got knowledgeable about it, and he thought to himself, you know what? These guys are right. This is going to work, and I have to either decide I'm going to, be a part of it and support it and build a business around it with his iBit product, or I've got to say, no, it's bullshit, and he'll end up like the guy who was the CEO of Vanguard did, where he got fired because he blew the call. So, you know, everybody kind of has to, in my opinion, and Max has pointed this out, ultimately you have to bend the knee. You have to do the work, do the analysis, understand what it is. And, look, being skeptical is totally fine. I mean, the whole chapter on skepticism was driven by my wife, who was extremely skeptical of the whole thing when I got involved with it, and said, look, you should compare this to other technologies. I mean, when something new comes along, people like the old way of doing things. People who are very invested in the old way of doing things tend to say to themselves, well, that's not going to work, or that's stupid. And to be fair and frank, I mean, when I got involved with it in 20, I was aware of it in 2009, 2010, and 11. People were mining it. It was very cheap. It almost had no price until the pizza transaction. And my original view of it was like, this isn't going to work. I've seen this. I mean, I saw eCash, I saw DigiCash, I saw B Money. There were 5 or 6 attempts to do this, all of which provided pieces of what became Bitcoin, right? Pre-Bitcoin, but they all failed because they didn't have the entire solution. They didn't have the hashing, they didn't have the difficulty. I mean, all the things that went into making this the solution to the Byzantine general's problem, they weren't all there. And so, I did the simple mental heuristic where I said, oh, yeah, yeah, electronic cash. Oh, sure. Yeah, I get it. It would be nice, but it's been tried. It doesn't work. But as it turns out, eventually it did work. They kept iterating and iterating. I mean, if you read the history of the Wright brothers, I mean, they tried a lot of things in terms of flight, and before they actually found what worked. And it's kind of the same thing. I mean, eventually these guys figured out what worked. And so yeah, it's but I understand the skepticism and I get it. And as you and I both know, I think probably the biggest thing that's hurt Bitcoin is crypto. I think that, when I go to most people who are intelligent and I talk to them about this, they immediately jump to Sam Bankman-Fried and fraud and crypto and rug pulls and Solana and just all the bad behavior in all of these other things that are not Bitcoin. It's like they're all imitation Bitcoin, but they don't work. Whereas Bitcoin is actually the real deal. And I try to make that very clear in the book, and I think it's really important for all Bitcoiners to lead with that, because I think that's probably the number one concern. And I get it. I mean, I know a lot of people who lost a lot of money in crypto. They thought they'd never come back. But if they continue to study it, they eventually come to the conclusion you and I have come to, which is, no, this is actually real and it works. I mean, 16 years, 860 some odd thousand blocks, and it's working. So yeah.
Yeah, the cycles of things. The point you made there at the end of people getting burned with crypto and then eventually finding Bitcoin as a solution. I've been joking around as of lately that the government has been speedrunning shitcoining on their own.
Possibly. Right. Yeah.
Well, up until the signing of the executive order that actually, kicked out all the shit coins. But up until that point, right, we mentioned earlier Trump coin. I don't think we mentioned Libra token, which was
Oh,
Javier
yeah.
Malay's.
Wasn't that disappointing? I mean, I had so much hope for that guy, and what's he doing? Right. Yeah.
Well, it's incentives. It goes back to fiat being, the bad side of the moral compass, wanting to get rich quick. In Argentina's case, they aren't the global economic leader, so they can't print the they
Right.
can't print the
No, I mean,
Argentinian peso in mass.
it's a huge temptation, and many people have succumbed to it. And I don't understand how or why, but well, I actually do understand how and why. I mean, it's just, but it's a short-term gain for a long-term loss.
Yeah. Well, and now today, I mean, it's so hard for your day-to-day person, like I was saying earlier, to be able to take in the news and digest it. I know you mentioned Enron, and probably
Yeah.
another financial scandal around that time was Bernie Madoff scandal as
Oh
well.
yeah. Right.
And those were talked about for what, 2 years, 3 years, like enough
Yeah.
time for the general public to digest it. Literally, in the last 90 days since Mina, we've seen Bitcoin hit an all-time high at 110K. That brings in, we always know when price hits an all-time high, it brings in a new class of investors and people who've never really paid attention. So they're interested in Bitcoin. They
Yeah.
see all these rug pulls with the shit coins happening, and now price is down. I say jokingly, we're down to what? I'm looking at my block clock here, 82,000 at the time of this recording, which is nothing, right? Especially somebody like you who found Bitcoin at $400. But for somebody who's just getting in, who doesn't have a lot of retirement savings, right? We're preaching that Bitcoin is the alternative solution. How would you make sense to somebody like that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a chart in the book that shows this. I mean, and I think it's really important and incumbent upon all senior Bitcoiners or people who've been in it a while and they're trying to orange pill their friends to explain to their friends what this asset is and how volatile it is in these early days of adoption. And the only way, as you and I both know, the only way you really get hurt in Bitcoin is to chase a new price high, to then have it go over the top of the cliff and go down, 20, 30, 50, in the worst case, 70 or 80%. But I don't think we'll see many of those anymore. But I mean, 50% down seems entirely doable to me, from any level, really. And then to sell, because these cycles tend to be about 4 years, and everybody who's been in it over 4 years is in the green, has made money on it. But but it's sad, and some people just don't understand that. And again, it's having a long time preference, and so it argues for dollar cost averaging. It argues for buying it when it's down. I mean, you can, how expensive it is. There are models that you can use to look at that. What multiple, how far above or below its 200-day moving average is it? I mean, when it's below its 200-day moving average, it's obviously tends to be on the cheap side. When it's way stretched above that, it can be a little bit ahead of itself. And so one would say that, the best way to get involved, I mean, right now it's below its 200-day moving average, I believe. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I think it is. And, so it's probably a pretty good time to be buying right now. I mean, the power law model actually, I think, has some predictive capability. I mean, there's a 97% R squared on, looking backwards on the price there. And I think the power law has it today. It should be at about 97 as fair value. So it's 82. You're buying it at a discount, and it's the nature of the asset. I mean, I suspect, in this run, it's going to go to 200, 250 sometime in the next year and a half. And then, by the way, it'll get overextended and it'll come back down to 125, lose half its value. I mean, one thing that has happened, and I think it'll continue to happen as it's more widely adopted, is that the the fluctuations will not be as large. I mean, in the early days, I think there was one drawdown that was almost 90%. I just can't see that happening anymore. I think that, and there were several that were 70% ish. I think that even those probably are unlikely. But, when I advise somebody buying it, I say, look, buy what you know you can live with for a long period of time, i.e., 5+ years, and understand that if it goes down 50%, the correct move is to double down, not to sell it. Or if you don't want to double down, fine, but just hold it, because as you and I both know, it continually hits higher highs and higher lows. So, I mean, obviously better to be buying during one of those low periods. But, if what we're talking about here is an asset, particularly you're young, that you're going to hold for 20, 30, 40 years, I mean, if these are going to be worth $1 million a coin, and I see that happening within 10 years easily, does it really matter if you bought it at 80 or 96 or 105? I mean, all three of those prices are at $1 million a coin are going to look really good. So, that's kind of my advice. Another thing I say, I mean, on making the case for buying it, the two other things I use, because I have a lot of friends who are, fairly well off, and I've tried to convince them to buy it, and some I've been successful. Most of them I haven't, to be honest with you. Most of them think I'm nuts. And what I say to them is, I say, look, guys, if the financial system is the Titanic and it's going down because the government's out of control and they can't stop printing money, which is what the book talks about, and Bitcoin and gold are lifeboats, and Bitcoin's the best lifeboat. Okay, so I paid 10 grand for some seats on the lifeboat. I paid 400 for one seat or two seats, and I paid 70 grand for another seat, whatever. Okay, the price to you today is 80 grand for a seat. So you can either stay on that Titanic or you can buy a seat for 80 grand. Do you care that I bought some at 10? I mean, look, Max bought a bunch at 2, and I'm jealous as can be about that. But, I wasn't smart enough to see it back then. I didn't do that. So be it. I mean, everybody feels like they pay too much for Bitcoin. And everybody feels like they don't have enough Bitcoin. And yet, wait 10 years and people are going to look at you and like, holy shit, you bought it $80,000? That stuff's worth $800,000 a coin. You own a full coin? Oh my God, that's stunning. I mean, that's going to be the progression, in my opinion. So the other thing I would say that I like to emphasize again in the book is the chart by Jesse Myers. It just shows how early we are, right? There are $900 trillion of financial assets in the world: stocks, bonds, real estate, cash, all that stuff. Bitcoin is less than 2. In fact, I checked this morning, it's like 1.6. But at 2, it's 0.2% of all the financial assets in the world. It could go up 10x, i.e., we could go from 80,000 a coin to 800,000 a coin, and it would still only be 2% of all the assets in the world. I mean, really? I mean,
So early.
Yeah, we're really very. I mean, on the big scale of things, if this is the best form of money that mankind has ever created, and I believe it is. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but it's not. It's a technology that cannot. It's a form of money that cannot be diluted. We've never had that before. Let me emphasize: we've never had that before. It's new, right? A technological innovation. If that's the case, if it's the best form of money that's ever been created, why shouldn't it become the most valuable form of money ever created? I think it will. So, that's how I see it.
Well, we're definitely trending that way, especially with the attention that governments are
Well, that's
having.
right. Yeah.
Everybody talks about gradually, then suddenly, at least in Bitcoiner circles, right? And it very much feels like, I know I've always been saying this. I have been saying this since 2017. I'm like, we're in the suddenly phase back when Bitcoin rose
Yeah, I
to
know.
10K. And you want to say that now at 100, but it's when you frame it up the way you just did, where Bitcoin's hardly even captured that $9 trillion worth of assets, it really sets the perspective of how early we are And I think it's also important to reiterate to anybody who, isn't paying attention to the day-to-days, but just wants to know, "Hey, why is Bitcoin's price down?" Don't pay attention to the fiat price. I think the thing we all say is 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. There's
Right.
only gonna be 21 million that ever
Right.
exists, so get your slice of the pie.
That's exactly right. I mean, the beautiful thing about this investment, Alan, is that you can just kind of buy it and forget about it and go live your life. And you just know that I mean, I also have price performance charts in the book that just show you how much it's gone up over time. And, I don't know what that average number is going to be in the future. It's going to come down somewhat, as we get to the top of the adoption curve. But gosh, I mean, to have an asset that's going to grow in value 20, 30, 40% a year compounded for a bunch of years. I mean, in the old days, investing in stocks and bonds, everything else I used to invest in, I would have killed to have an asset that looked like that. I've never seen anything like it. So it's just, yeah, I mean, it just, you know, it, the hard part, the hard part is to not do anything. I mean, you got all these people who are wired up on trading. Oh, I want to buy it and I want to sell it, get it the right way. No, 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 no. You don't need to do any of that stuff. You can just buy it, lock it away, and wake up in 5 years, you're going to be richer. 10 years, you're going to be even richer still. 15 years, you're going to be super rich. And so, it's just, it's kind of one of those. And that's hard because that's just, it kind of goes against, the stockbroker mentality, which is, oh, you got to trade, you got to move, you got to, dodge and weave and be brilliant. And this is like, no, this is actually the case where the tortoise is going to beat the hare because it's just going to keep marching along year after year, getting more valuable.
Absolutely. So I know we've talked a lot about the book. I know we've covered a lot of things, and I don't wanna spoil the entire book because I want
Oh, you
people to
can. That's
go.
okay. Go
I
ahead.
want people to buy it.
The opening
Uh,
scene is on Amazon, so you can read it. That's the hook to get everybody to read it. Yeah.
what would you say is your favorite, chapter in the book and
Oh
why?
gosh, I don't know. I mean, I like them all. I don't know. To me, the earlier part of the book where I just point out how broken America is, and then I talk about the moral quality of money. I think I think far too few people focus on that, and America's. I mean, the thing that again, I'm on the older side compared to yourself. I mean, the thing that I noticed is I remember what it was like to grow up in an America that was much fairer, kinder, more balanced. There was a middle class. Everybody kind of got along. And I look around right now and I look at the political strife and, and don't get me wrong, we live with all kinds of amazing technological advantages that we didn't have back then. I mean, I went to college and I could call my parents, once a weekend for 5 minutes because the long distance calls were so expensive, right? I mean, compare that to where we are today. I can talk to anyone in the world anywhere basically for free, on video.
Just like you and
um,
I right now.
yeah, just like we are now, exactly. So don't get me wrong, the technological advances have been just stunning, but societally, yeah, I'm not sure, it's better. I think that and I think that's because we lost sight of some of those old fundamental virtues, of honesty and honest money. And so I guess my favorite part of the book is kind of that chart in the first couple of chapters where it just shows what happened when we went off the gold standard and inflation just became a way of life. And then when you combine that and you read it, I think what you'll see is it's only gotten worse. And now it's really pretty bad. I mean, part of what led to me writing the book was watching some political thing on TV, where Team Red and Team Blue were just going at it, as they always do, hammer and tong. And I was just kind of like, you guys are all arguing over the wrong shit. I mean, because I mean, if we solve the monetary problem, all that stuff you're arguing over wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
It just, I was ready to rip my hair out. And I thought, somebody's got to explain this, in terms that the average citizen can understand. And so that's what led me to start writing the book. And if I've done a good job of explaining it, and if I create a groundswell movement of people who read it and understand it, and they join you and me and all the other Bitcoiners who believe in sound money for a number of reasons. I mean, end the wars, be fairer, and wealth, the wealth gap, rein in the cotillionaires, all the reasons that they're in the book, then the book will have been a success. I mean, that's how I see it. I mean, the book, in my mind right now, the book is a success with Bitcoiners, but I kind of knew that would happen, right? I mean, I'm just preaching to the choir. I mean, you guys all love it. Okay, great. And I really appreciate that. I mean, I'm super appreciative. But that's really not the target audience. The target audience is your friend who's a skeptic, or your mom, or your dad, or whatever. It's just the average citizen who's walking around going, why the hell am I getting screwed here? Why the hell
Yeah,
is
why
why is my life so hard because of all these, because of this inflation? It's just not right, and they don't understand why. And so this is why, and then that's part one, and then here's what you got to do about it. That's part two. Right.
the fix the money, fix the world take by
Yeah,
Larry.
exactly. That's right. And I borrowed that from Marty, by the way. So it's not an original statement, but yes, I've definitely made that my byline: fix the money, fix the world. I mean, it's at the core of a lot of the other problems we have. Not all of them, not all of them. There will always be problems in the world, but this, to me, this is the biggest and most pressing one right now. And it's glaringly obvious, at least to me anyway.
Yeah. No, I share a lot of the same sentiments as you when I'm listening, whether it's, political talk with Team Red and Team Blue, or even like some of the bigger podcasters like Rogan when they're talking about X situation and they're ignoring the fact that the root cause of the problem is the money. I find myself yelling in the air
Right. Exactly.
like it's like Bitcoin's the solution.
Yeah.
Um Larry, I know we're coming up on time here a little bit. I got a
I've
couple
got
more
as much.
questions I want to ask you
Yeah,
before
keep
we
going.
wrap
I've got
up.
as much time as you like.
Awesome. Um, as somebody who's been so invested in markets and is an investor yourself, right? I've
Right.
heard you mention a couple of times that there's 5 choppy years ahead and then there's a better world.
Yeah.
Um, what is your boldest call for Bitcoin leading up into that 5 years? And what does this choppy world look like?
It's a great question. And I hope it's not too choppy. And I hope it's, there's just, in my opinion, and the book talks about this as policy suggestions and monetary resets. And there's a way through this without having it be horrible. Okay. This doesn't have to be the mandibles. Um, you know, you're familiar with the book. Others are too. Yeah. So, I tend to think the problem's going to get resolved in the next 5 to 10 years, because that's kind of the length of fourth turnings. And we are in a fourth turning. And for those who haven't read that book, I highly recommend that book as well. And the issue here is, what is money? And because the credit system we've got has just gotten out of control, and it's painfully obvious to many, many people that it's a problem. And so we need to do a monetary reset. The monetary reset will work and will be much better if we reset to sound money. I think that is coming. But I think, frankly, we need to have a bigger political movement for it. And that's why I wrote the book. And then I also think, frankly, we're going to have to suffer from more inflation, to the point where a large part of the population says, okay, enough is enough. This is horrible. We cannot continue this way. Fix it, government. And so people will emerge, as the circumstances always drive. There's a problem, there'll be a hero. People will emerge within the government that'll say, okay, we got to solve this. We got to get to a monetary standard where the money is sound. And hopefully that'll be, choosing Bitcoin. Sadly, I think there's some possibility that, based on the old system and history and everything, they might choose gold first, which would be a mistake. But at least it'd be a step in the right direction, and then you could transition from gold to Bitcoin. So, but in either case, being on any kind of a sound money standard would be substantially better than being on a fiat standard like we are today. And I think in the worst case, in a hoped for case, we have very high inflation. We get a big political movement for sound money. We do a one-time reset, similar to what Roosevelt did in the 30s, where we say, okay, we're going on this standard, and this is what we're going to use as our money, and we can't print it anymore, and government deficits have to be balanced, and all that debt is going to be written down in terms of the new money. And if you did that and we didn't have a war, if you think about it, basically all the technology, all the people, all the energy, all the skills, everything we got would still be here. Now, some people would be richer and some people would be poorer. Bondholders would be significantly poorer. People who already own that sound money, like gold and silver and Bitcoin, they'd be richer. But, and there would be a period of suffering as a result of inflation. But my view is that if we have a big one-time inflation and we reset so that we don't have any inflation on a go-forward basis, that's a much more intelligent way than just kind of bleeding out through inflation year after year after year after year, which is kind of what we're doing right now. So I think there's a way to do that sort of a reset. The book calls for it. I call for it. I mean, I've sent the book to everybody in government, including Trump, Vance, Bissent, you name it. And, there are a lot of us, there are a lot of sound money advocates out there who have their hands raised, who'd be willing to help. I mean, Luke Groman, Judy Shelton, myself. I mean, the list is long of sound money people who know how to do this. And, we can return to that system, and things will get better quickly, and they'll be good on the other side of it. And so that's where I hope we're going. In fact, I know we'll get there. What's very hard to tell, though, Alan, is the path. I mean, because there's just so many variables, and and hopefully we don't have to suffer through just a complete outright collapse of fiat currency. That somewhere as we're heading toward that, the people who are in positions of power say to themselves, "All right, this is a problem. We can solve it. We need to solve it. We will solve it before we have total hyperinflation." But I mean, I think some people say hyperinflation is extreme and impossible, and I disagree. It's not. It's a tail event, but it's not a zero probability tail. I mean, if you look at other countries that have behaved the way this country is behaving now, it's those policies have led to hyperinflations in the past. Now, we need to go into Doge a little bit, because Doge is actually an effort to slow down this train, and they're doing it, but they really have a very tough task in front of them. And my view is, the train is barreling down the tracks, and maybe they can slow it down, but they can't stop it. And that's just the math. I mean, if you look at the interest expense, if you look at the growth in debt, if you look at, I mean, Elon says he can take $2 trillion out of the deficit. There's no way. I mean, unless they decide they're going to cut Social Security, Medicare, defense, and interest costs by 50%, because that's what it'll take. And, we can all handicap the odds of that occurring, but my handicapping of it suggests that those odds are not high. And so the fiat train continues to roll along out of control. The correct solution is a monetary reset. And, what I think we need to hope for, and what the book advocates, is to spread the word, to support politicians who understand that and believe in that and will do that. And that's hopefully where we get to. So, and hopefully we do it in as fair a way as possible without a ton of pain. But, to be frank and to be brutally honest, you can't guarantee that. Other fourth turnings, there's been significant pain. I mean, the best, look backwards on fourth turnings, you look at World War II, a lot of pain. 50 million people died. Civil War, a lot of pain. Big percentage of the population died. American Revolution, a lot of pain. So, there could be some pain, sadly. But, I hope I hope the pain is minimal, and that we just adjust and go back to sound money.
They often say, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a lot of potential catalysts out there for a big market disrupting situation to unfold. But the biggest difference this go around, is going to sound super cliche, is that, there's an alternative. It's Bitcoin. Bitcoin's hope. So hopefully things play out in a sense that don't require World War III, or nuclear Armageddon, or
Right.
some sort of catalyst of
I,
that sort.
yeah. I don't think any of that. My personal
Yeah,
view is that we're beyond that. My personal view is that Hiroshima and Nagasaki scared the living shit out of every intelligent human being in the world. And the notion of a nuclear war, we all know that it would end it for everybody. And so, absent a real madman getting control of the button in any country, it's just not going to happen.
right.
Having said that, there could be one hell of an economic disruption. I mean, one hell of a big economic disruption. And, that would be a shock. But again, and let me say this, I've studied countries that have gone through these currency events. Okay. I've read the histories of them, and, they're bad, right? I mean, varying degrees of bad, whether it's full hyperinflation, whatever, but they're bad. Generally, they cause pain. But the minute they reset to sound money, everyone reorganizes and goes, okay, I get it. Oh, this is the money. Okay, great. People start doing shit. They get up every morning. They do their job. They pay in sound money. They get paid in sound money. The money doesn't depreciate, and things return kind of to normal. In fact, they'll be better than normal, because you don't have, the inflation and the fiat bullshit that you got going on now. So So, the optimistic side of all of this is that when we do get back to a sound money standard, things will be good. The pessimistic side is that we are in a mess, and that, there may be pain before we get to, we've got to take our medicine before we start to heal, and that's just a fact. And some politicians will, cater wail about, oh, taking the medicine is just too painful, we can't do it. Well, the alternative is going to be worse. So, you know,
Right. Do you, just curious, I'm shooting off the cuff here.
yeah, that's fine.
Um, you mentioned Doge.
Yeah.
I know your peers. I spoke with Lavish a couple of weeks ago, and he also mentioned similar sentiments that they just cannot. It's not possible for them to cut enough off the top without directly impacting Medicare, without impacting defense spending, like you mentioned. So, what can Elon do within reason, or what is he going to have to do? And then, we've talked about the resetting of the global financial order, at least for the US, right? Is there a world where the dollar coexists with Bitcoin? And is that potential mechanism of coexistence through stablecoins?
Yes. I mean, let's do the last question first. Yes, the dollar and Bitcoin could definitely coexist, and stable coins can be the bridge between the two. The um, there really is, as you know, there are two things about money that are important, right? One is medium of exchange, the other is store of value. So Bitcoin is going to emerge, already has in my view, but it'll continue to emerge as the ultimate premier store of value form of money, right? It's sounder than anything, best, stock to flow ratio, blah blah blah. So that's going to be there, but it's still, an on-chain transaction makes no sense for buying coffee; it's too expensive. So, and you buy coffee in dollars, and by the way, in the West, we've got a lot of good payment networks in terms of, credit cards and Venmo and PayPal. I mean, you got a million ways to pay for stuff. So, it's not like Bitcoin's not a transaction oriented form of currency yet, although Lightning could change that. Um, they could definitely coexist for a while. I mean, right now, what it's becoming, in my view, is the base layer superior financial asset. I mean, bonds used to be that, right? If you had a lot of wealth and you wanted to protect it, you owned a U.S. government bond because it was as good as gold, so to speak. It wasn't being debased. This was back in the old days, and you were paid interest for holding it. So it was like that was just a triple win, and that was the base layer of the financial system. Of course, now it's being debased massively. You're not getting paid enough to hold it, and it's not as good as gold anymore since we went off the gold standard. So, so Bitcoin is replacing bonds as the sovereign store of value asset, and ultimately, all of these medium of exchange assets will tie back into the store of value asset. But frankly, I mean, if you and I are transacting in dollars and you get a dollar and you spend a dollar, and that dollar is depreciating in value, say 7 or 8% a year, which is what Saylor calculates it is, but you spend it over, 3 days after you get it. Well, the depreciation for you is not very large because you didn't hold it for any period of time. And so they can clearly coexist. The issue, though, becomes as more and more people realize that saving in dollars makes no sense. Eventually we're going to trend towards what we all know as Gresham's law, which is to say you spend your dollars as fast as you can get them, and you convert all your excess dollars and savings into Bitcoin because you know it's going to hold value better. And when that gets extreme, so that everybody's doing that all of the time, pretty soon people are going to say, well, I don't want to even accept a dollar. Why should I even accept it for a couple of days? Because its value is going down and prices are going up, and so on and so forth. So, and there will be other payment mechanisms that will allow you to transact in Bitcoin. So that intermediate exchange into dollars for a transaction won't even need to take place. So yes, they can coexist, but it's kind of like, as Saylor and others have said, in the end, there can only be one, right? I mean, there really only can be one form of superior money, and that's Bitcoin. And there'll be payment rails, like in the dollar might be one of them, and Lightning might be another one. And God knows there might even be some shit coin that becomes, a decent payment rail. Because I know, don't I see you shaking your head, and I agree, but I don't discount the possibility that some other shit coin will emerge as a good payment rail. And look, a payment rail is a payment rail, right? If you can, quickly convert into it, I mean, that's what a stable coin is, right?
Right.
If you can quickly convert into it, use it, and pay something electronically quickly, there's use in that. That's a use case. It's legit. Doesn't It's not a store of value case, but it's a use case. So yeah, and we none of us really know how this is going to emerge. I mean, to be frank, I had kind of hoped Lightning would be much more advanced than it is right now. I mean, I don't know how much you use it. I use it a lot at Bitcoin events. I use it a lot, orange pilling people. But I've used it as an example recently to try and send multi-thousand-dollar transactions. And, they're slow, clunky, and sometimes fail. And,
Yeah.
that's not a medium of exchange. I mean, Lightning, I mean, and why is that? Because there's not enough liquidity in the Lightning network yet.
Well, and it doesn't help banks get onboarded into mass transactions either because
Well,
they're the
that's right
ones
too.
doing.
Yeah, and the credit card
Yeah.
companies haven't adopted it yet, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
so the whole MOE thing is still kind of a jump ball from my point of view. But I'm an investor, and I'm into capital allocation and saving, and this is the best savings vehicle I've ever seen, by a large measure. And so and I think therefore ultimately will also become a means of exchange currency as well. But that's a 10-year process. I mean, I think I started off before I got into Bitcoin and everything else. I was a technology investor for most of my career, and I made a lot of investments in the internet in the early 1990s and 93, 4 or 5. And this reminds me so much of that because that shit was really clunky too. I mean, and I was telling friends, hey, this is going to change the world. Everyone's going to be able to talk to each other, email each other. I couldn't foresee video. I couldn't foresee Google. I mean, I could foresee a lot of stuff, but I was kind of like, I think having all these computers connected in a network is going to matter in a big way. But you had dial-up modems, and you had green screens before Windows came along. I mean, it was really clunky shit in the early days. And of course, look at it now. You and I are different parts of the country. We're speaking with video. I mean, and so, but it's 25 years, or more actually, 30 years really from 1995 that happened. So, I think we're gonna have a similar kind of time frame here. I mean, it's going to take 10, 15 years for this MOE stuff to really kick in, as surrounding Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, as it pertains to the medium of exchange conversation too, and maybe the integration of some of these stables, the beauty of the network ultimately as a decentralized, consensus-driven mechanism is that anything that's worth integrating into Bitcoin will have market value to
Oh,
it.
that's right. Well, and most importantly, the base layer cannot and will not be corrupted. And that's the key. I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that you have a distributed base layer based on mathematical protocol that everyone would have to vote to change, and nobody's going to vote to do that. That's the key. We've got a truth machine. We've got a monetary truth machine that never existed prior to the invention of this code, and that is a big, big, big deal. And just as, like I say, I remember being back in the internet back then, and I sensed, boy, I think this is going to turn into stuff. I mean, pets.com, well, okay, selling kibble on the internet wasn't really what made sense back then, but you could just kind of see, hey, having everybody connected, that's going to matter. And then, I mean, actually one of the first big use cases back then, I remember when it came out, I was so impressed by it, was eBay. And it was
Mhm.
it was a worldwide swap meet. Oh, you got something you want to sell? Put it up on eBay, and it was just, okay, swap meets have existed for years, but you had to go down to the corner and, somebody was having a swap and you saw crap that was for sale at a discount. And well, what if you could connect everybody in the world and say, hey, I want to buy a used pair of this or a used that. Oh, here's mine, and here's how you do it on eBay. And just these kinds of things will organically spring up as we go forward. We can't even see them. We don't even know what they are now, but they're coming. They're definitely coming.
Yeah. No one I remember in, pre-COVID days, 2019, nobody predicted accurately the emergence of, large language models, AI,
Right.
the importance of
Yeah,
HPC
right,
centers being driven by nuclear reactors to
right.
handle all the compute level. It's crazy.
It's absolutely
Um,
crazy. Yeah,
and it's funny that you bring up eBay, given the history of Bitcoin, and its close ties to Silk Road, decentralized marketplace.
yeah.
Obviously, Ross being freed recently. Um, yeah, I think the line you said that Bitcoin is a protocol of truth. If that doesn't convince anybody listening to this to not go out there and just buy some, hold some,
I mean,
I
there's so many reasons to buy some, and I mean, look, somebody said, I had a really nice guy reviewed my book, and he said, look, if you can read this book and you don't want to buy some Bitcoin, you're an idiot. I mean, it's kind of like,
Yeah.
because the argument, I mean, I tried to make a really compelling argument, and I hope, but we'll see. I mean, I've tested it on people my age, skeptics, etc. And I had one guy came back and said, "Gosh, I get it. You're totally right, but I'm just afraid of computers." And I was like, "Yeah, I get it. Okay, well, get one of your kids to help you.
Yeah.
It's not that hard." Or I mean, that's another thing that's really been a big positive, as you and I are both aware of. And obviously, we don't think it's as good a solution as owning it natively and being self sovereign, but the ETFs, it's a pretty good solution. I mean, if you're a boomer and you don't want to get a Trezor and learn how to do, fine. I mean, sure, you've got 6102 risk, but you can put some of your retirement assets into this thing, as you should, and it'll show up on your Morgan Stanley statement, that you own
Mhm.
FBTC. And so there've been a lot of things that are, and that's just going to continue. There's just going to be more and more easier ways of doing this. So
Well, it's the gradually then suddenly
that's
thesis
right.
just playing out. I mean, it's just
That's right.
different tools of exposure for different classes of
And
people and risk tolerances.
I really like what Saylor said, and it's been saying, at least I don't know if he said it recently, but I remember hearing him say that this next 10 years, I mean, in the book, there are a lot of really good charts that show kind of adoption curves. I mean, and the gradually, then suddenly, I love you said that earlier. I mean, it does feel to me like we're right at that cusp. I mean, people, and the book will help. I mean, people, pretty much, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to be an American and not know what Bitcoin is, right? Now, you may not own it yet, but you'd be hard pressed to not have heard of it, right?
Yeah.
And then you start seeing your friends make a lot of money and you start reading the books, you start studying. I mean, feels to me like this next 10 years is going to be a real, he calls it the gold rush period for Bitcoin. I think he's right. I mean,
Right.
we're going to go from a small percentage of the population owning it to a meaningful percentage of the population owning it in the next 10 years. And of course, the implications of that for price, given the fixed supply, I mean, 42 million millionaires and 21 million Bitcoin, and not all those are available. I mean, it's going to take a lot higher prices to free some of those coins up. So that's coming.
Yeah. No, absolutely. One of my favorite barometers of testing where we are in terms of market sentiment, and this goes to your point of Americans just being familiar with every American being familiar with just the word Bitcoin is Thanksgiving.
Right. Yeah.
So now when I show up, all the family members, I'm no longer the crazy Bitcoin guy. They're like, "Hey, where should I buy? Okay, how should I custody?
Exactly.
What should my DCA be?"
E-
We
e-
have we
Yeah.
have corporate institutions adopting and everything,
Right.
and then lastly, uh, the Bitcoin conference as a whole, seeing the guests
Yeah.
stack up from year to year. I mean, we had President Trump speak at
Right.
the last one, so if that doesn't tell you where
All right.
where we
All right.
are,
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean,
yeah,
yeah, no, I've been going to them since the very beginning. And I remember Jack Mahler's announcing El Salvador, and yeah, and it was, I mean, there was a group of us, but it was a fraction of the size of Nashville, a fraction. It was stinky by
yeah,
comparison. And so yeah, it's very clear to me that this is a real movement. I mean, the ETFs is a big thing. Larry Fink is a big thing. I mean, and you've got these world-class investors. You've got Paul Tudor Jones, who's one of the best investors of the last 30 years, saying, that it's the fastest horse in the monetary debasement race. You got Ray Dalio, a brilliant, hedge fund manager, one of the best in the country, who's was a big gold guy, and has finally come around to, gee, this is digital gold, and I really like it. So it's, people are waking up to it. And, what is it? Sailor says you want to buy something that, can't be stopped, everyone needs, and nobody understands. because and it's the nobody understands that gives you the opportunity. Because once everybody understands it, it's going to be more fairly priced. And there will come a time, by the way, when the returns per year will go down because we're,
yeah,
we're much further. I mean, the reason it's doing so well right now is we got double curves going on. So gold's going up now too because of the sovereign debt crisis, right? But Bitcoin's gone much faster than gold because gold's been around 5,000 years. Everybody knows about gold, wants gold. They've already bought gold. They get it. But Bitcoin is digital gold, and therefore, you've got I mean, it goes up when the government prints money, and the government's, will print money. We know that. The book will convince you of that. And then it also goes up, because you've got this adoption curve going on, because right now, 5% of the citizens get it and own it. and 95% don't even know they need it yet. But guess what? In the next 10 years, a big part of that 95 is going to realize they do need it, and it's going to go up a lot.
Yeah. Well, I have one more question for
Sure.
you, Larry. But before I ask, for the sake of the audience, because they might read me in the comments, we started talking about Doge.
Yeah. Okay.
Want to get your final comments on Doge, some of the things that, Musk has uncovered, such as USA ID. I know just to circle back, we chatted about how what he's cutting right now isn't enough to make a difference. So, is this all just a facade, a show to satisfy, the hunger that voters had, or do you think that there's going to be some real change brought on by the Department of Government Efficiency?
Well, I look, there already has been some real change, and there's no doubt. I think what he's going to uncover is some real waste and fraud that will get cleaned up. I think the important thing from an investor point of view and from a country point of view, from all of us point of view, is to understand how much is that, how much can be solved. I mean, the amount of deficit that we're running is just way too large to solve via, cleaning up some fraud. I mean, let's say the fraud, they get 5 or 10% of the total budget, but the total budget, in last fiscal year, we spent $6.75 trillion. 80% of that was Medicare, Medicaid, interest, and defense. So only like 1.27 was everything else. So, and the deficit was 1.8. So if you took everything else to zero, you'd still have a deficit. So, you know, you just can't get to Doge solving the problem. I applaud it. I applaud the notion of trying to make government more efficient. I applaud the notion of audits and not spending money in areas we don't need to spend money. And, maybe, they can spend less in defense. But you just can't get there, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. I mean, we're way too far down the monetary and fiscal irresponsibility track. Now, maybe over some period of time, we can get there. But I think the notion of instantly fixing it's not realistic. It's just not realistic. It's going to take years, arguably a decade to get us back to some sort of a form of balance. And while we're getting there, we might as well try and return to sound money, because that will, I think, solve a lot of other problems too. So, I applaud, trying to rein in government excess. I think everybody does. But I
Hmm.
also, I mean, Elon's an entrepreneur. He dreams big, he talks big, he projects big. I get it. That's how he's made things happen. But I mean, in 2018, he said, you'll be able to buy a Tesla. It'll be self-driving. You can rent it out as a taxi next year. That's 2018. Now, so 7 years ago. Now, I recently, and it didn't happen, right? But to his credit, I recently rode in my brother-in-law's Tesla, and we said, take us from Wellesley to Boston. The damn thing drove us the whole way there without any problems. I mean, we actually are pretty much at self-driving right now. So, I wouldn't bet against, eventually solving these problems. I just, they're going to take time, is kind of, my estimation on it.
5 choppy years.
Yeah, exactly.
5 choppy years.
That's exactly right. Sadly, we got 5 choppy years. But you know what? If you own Bitcoin, in my opinion, if you own Bitcoin, you got the right asset, and you can sit back and watch the show. I mean, my level of hope pre-Bitcoin as a gold guy, tilting at the windmills, trying to fight the battle with the central banks, I was pretty despondent because they have paper gold, and they've been winning for years and years and years. This tool is a better tool. and with Bitcoin, I've got a lot of confidence we're going to win. That this is it. This is the end of the fiat era. Sometime in the next 10 years. So that and once you kind of get to understand that and see it, even though you realize there may be choppiness from here to the end, you're kind of like, it gives you a lot of confidence that, gosh, I'm on the right side of it, and it's going to get better. That, to me, that's a much happier way of living than, oh my God, this is terrible, it's never going to end, I'm getting eaten alive by inflation, I don't know what the hell to do about it. Mentally, that's a bad place to be. But again, I mean, that therein is the book. I mean, I'm trying to help people, right? I mean, I'm trying to help people. realize that there's a way out. There's a definite way out. It's broken, but that's the bad news. The good news is there's a way out. So, read the book, give it to your friends. Obviously say that's self-interested, although you don't make much money on books, I've discovered. but but if we can change the world and make the world a much better place, that'll be a big win. So that,
Yeah. Well, and
you know,
you wrote the book to educate people
that's
as well.
exactly right. Yeah.
Where can people find your book?
So it's on Amazon right now, and it's in 3 formats. It's hardcover, softcover, and ebook, EPUB. I fumbled that in early days. If you got one of the bad copies, let me know by email or on Twitter, and I'll send you a new version. It's being read by Walker. Walker America's reading it. We will have an audiobook out. It's very close to being done. That should be out soon. And then, as many people probably listening know, I'm a loudmouth on Twitter. I'm no friend of the central banks. I'm just under my own name, Lawrence Lepard. And then my conference schedule this year for people who want me to sign the book, and I'm happy to sign it for free, obviously, anywhere I go. I will be in Dallas at Bitbuck Bloom. I will be at your show in Las Vegas in May. I'll be at Cheat Code in April with Peter. And then I'm going to Bitcoin Prague this summer in Prague. So, and then after that, I'll probably be less available because my wife said she had a new term for me the other day. She said, "I feel like a book widow." You've been ignoring me in favor of the book, and she's right. So I got to make that right.
No rest until we fix the money, right?
I don't know. Yeah, I threw the book out there. Now you guys go fix it. Okay, I gotta make my wife happy. So,
No, I totally understand that. Well, Larry, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting
likewise,
with
Alan.
you today.
Great questions. I always enjoy talking with you.
Same. I look forward to having you on next time, and hopefully before then be able to chat in Vegas.
Yeah, we'll see you in
Um,
Vegas for sure.
we covered a lot of ground, but I thought this was a really great conversation. Go follow Larry, go buy his book. He's one of the best experts in a space when it comes to Bitcoin financial policy and insights. Larry, absolute pleasure.
Oh, thanks, Alan. Really appreciate it.